Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
True crime with a dash of the paranormal, the garish, the strange, and the darkly comic. I'm Zevin Odelberg, host of Kinda Murdery, a podcast that's about more than just murder. It's my very own pocket dimension, home to a curated collection of bizarre and compelling stories. The unsolved, the unsettling, and the unbelievable. I cover it all, just so long as it's kinda murdery. That's right, folks, just like it says in the intro, I am Zevin Odelberg, and this is Kinda Murdery. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. I first encountered the story of the truck stop killer in an article with the same name, written by Vanessa Veselka and published in GQ on October 24th, 2012. In her GQ article, Vanessa Veselka tells her story in first person. The story you're about to hear on this episode of Kinda Murdery is Vanessa's story combined with information and narratives from other sources I've consulted and told in the third person, to create a version of the truck stop killer's story that is both personal and general, factual and emotional, and of course, true. We're headed for a dark, haunting ride down an abandoned highway, full of hidden dangers and unforgivable violence. So buckle up and join me as we uncover what truths we can and solve what mysteries we may. Kinda Murderies, the truck stop killer, starts now. He methodically prowled the highways, targeting teenage girls who had run away, those seemingly invisible to the world. In the scorching summer of 1985, she was one such girl. A chance encounter on I-95 with a stranger led to the most petrifying ordeal of her life. Years later, she revisits the haunts of her fraught youth, seeking insights into the terror she faced and the fate of the girls who were not as lucky. In the sweltering summer of 1985, near Martinsburg, Pennsylvania, the grim discovery of a body in a truck stop dumpster sent shockwaves through the area. The girl had just secured a ride and found herself in a nearby truck, her driver momentarily away to settle the fuel payment, when the body was discovered. The discovery unleashed chaos. A restaurant employee burst outdoors, urging onlookers to keep their distance as a curious crowd formed under the drizzle around the dumpster. The murmurs among the gathered revealed the victim was a girl, a teenage hitchhiker. This hit close to home as she was a teenage hitchhiker herself, and with a shudder she realized that the victim's fate could easily have been hers. Her gaze followed the truck driver as he navigated the rain-slicked asphalt back to their vehicle. A sinister thought crept into her mind. Could her driver be the murderer? His demeanor upon returning did nothing to quell her fears. With a brief comment about avoiding delays, he promptly resumed their journey, conspicuously avoiding any mention of the tragedy unfolding behind them. As they departed, she glanced in the side mirror, capturing a final image of the scene now being cordoned off by crime tape as additional law enforcement arrived. This moment, etched in her memory, marked the beginning of a haunting journey into the heart of darkness that lay hidden along the highways. Her ride to North Ohio with this particular trucker was unexpectedly pleasant, marked by the simple comforts of Diet Coke, the anthems of Bruce Springsteen, and the shared silence that comes with mutual respect. The trucker, by offering lunch without expecting anything in return, earned a rare esteem in the girl's eyes, a fleeting glimpse of decency in a world that often showed her the opposite. However, the precarious nature of her travels was brought back into stark relief several days later on a southward path along I-95 through the Carolinas. A new ride, another trucker, distinguished by his tall, lean frame and the unusual choice of a cotton button-down instead of the typical trucker attire, presented a facade of cleanliness and order in his cab that was enough to persuade her to join him. Initially, he might have seemed safe, but as they merged onto the open road, his demeanor took a dark turn. He withdrew into silence, ignoring her attempts at conversation, and transformed before her eyes. His posture straightened, his expression morphed into a mix of arrogance and emptiness, and then, unsettlingly, he began to speak. His topic of choice was morbid, focusing on the recent discovery of a dead girl in a dumpster, a subject that chilled her to the bone given her own close proximity to that exact scene days before. But it was the trucker's introduction of the Laughing Death Society, a group that mocked the finality of death, that truly unsettled her. "We laugh at death," he declared, a statement that encapsulated the terror of the situation and underscored the unpredictable danger of her hitchhiking existence. Minutes after the conversation had veered into the morbid territory of death and mockery, the trucker abruptly steered his truck onto the road's shoulder adjacent to a wooded area. He pulled out a hunting knife and issued a chilling command for her to move to the back of the cab. Desperately, she employed words as her defense, repeatedly pleading with him and telling him over and over again that he didn't have to do this, that it was his choice. It was his choice. Telling him he had the power to not proceed and promising to be quiet if she was spared. "Please," she said, "you don't have to do this. It's your choice. It's your choice." But when his gaze met hers, a silent understanding passed between them. The time for words had ended. Instinctively, she knew the grim finality of her situation. Then, unexpectedly, he uttered a single word: "Run." Heeding this command without hesitation, she fled into the woods, concealing herself for what felt like hours until the truck's departure signaled it was safe to emerge. Despite the encroaching darkness and the lingering shock, she found herself back on the same road, thumb outstretched, continuing her journey southward, never reporting the incident. Years later, in the spring of 2012, a friend's message brought the past into stark relief, linking her to a news story about Robert Ben Rhodes, a convicted serial killer and long-haul trucker. Initial photographs of Rhodes didn't trigger recognition. However, images of his younger self stirred a haunting familiarity. The resemblance lay in the glasses, the cheekbones, and the unmistakably arrogant expression. Although, despite those similarities, doubts lingered. Her memories of the trucker painted him as older, and Rhodes was only 39 at the time, but perhaps he appeared older than that in a teenager's eyes. To many teenagers, 39 is ancient. The peculiar lighting of that cloudy day, just before a storm, cast everything, including her memory, in shades of gray, leaving her to ponder the identity of the man who had let her run, and to wonder, as she often had over the years, why he did. Upon receiving an email from her friend asking if Rhodes was the guy, she reached out to the FBI, though she admitted to herself that part of her felt a sense of relief when her messages went unanswered. The incident was a distant memory, 27 years old, and, in the eyes of the law, perhaps not actionable. Yet the photographs of Rhodes haunted her, along with a cascade of questions that refused to be silenced. The possibility that the man who had threatened her life could be responsible for the death of the hitchhiker in the dumpster, and others, gnawed at her. Why had she been spared? Who was the girl discarded so callously in the dumpster? And why had she remained silent for so long? Driven by a need for closure and understanding rather than a fascination with the macabre, she delved into the dark world of Robert Ben Rhodes. Despite her lack of interest in serial killers, she discovered that Rhodes was infamously well documented. Through articles, television episodes, and books with titles like Driven to Kill, Roadside Prey, and Killer on the Road, she confronted the horrifying reality of the man that she may have encountered. Rhodes, a sexual sadist, had left a trail of unimaginable cruelty, abducting women, subjecting them to prolonged torture and rape, before finally ending their lives. His activities in the 1980s remained obscured by shadows, yet it was known he frequented the BDSM and swinger circles in Houston and was married at the time. His confession upon capture, claiming a 15-year span of criminal activity, suggested his crimes dated back to the 1970s. The 3 years leading up to his arrest saw him in the vicinity of 50 unsolved murders, as evidenced by his trucking logs. While direct connections to Rhodes for all 50 cases remain unconfirmed and Rhodes himself only acknowledged 3 murders, the FBI believes that at his most active, he may have been responsible for the deaths of 1 to 3 women monthly. This chilling insight into Rhodes' life offered a grim understanding of the depths of human depravity, raising profound questions about evil, survival, and the elusive nature of justice. Robert Ben Rhodes' reign of terror was abruptly halted by an Arizona state trooper's discovery that would chill the spine of anyone who heard it. A woman, Lisa Pennell, was found screaming, chained in the back of Rhodes' truck cab, leading to his immediate arrest on charges of kidnapping and assault. However, it was the harrowing case of Regina Walters that would ultimately seal Rhodes' fate, condemning him to a life behind bars. Regina, a 14-year-old girl from Pasadena, Texas, became one of Rhodes' most notorious victims after she and her boyfriend, Ricky Jones, accepted a ride from him in February of 1990. Jones' life was swiftly extinguished, his body later found in Mississippi, while Regina endured a nightmarish existence for weeks under Rhodes' control. The details of Regina's ordeal are harrowing. Rhodes subjected her to unimaginable acts of cruelty, including shaving her head and pubic hair, piercing her body with fishing hooks, and forcing her into a black dress and heels. He documented her terror in photographs before ultimately strangling her with a garrote fashioned from baling wire. Her slight 100-pound frame was discarded in an Illinois barn off of Interstate 70, where it was left to decay, a silent testament to the brutality she suffered. This tragic narrative resonated deeply with the girl, now woman, whose story we're telling, mirroring her own past experiences in a haunting echo of despair. Like Regina, she had ventured away from home with an older boyfriend, placing her trust in the transient mercy of truck drivers for survival. Regina's story illuminated an unforgiving reality. Within the vast, anonymous expanse of the road, she became invisible, her suffering unnoticed by those who encountered her. The forgotten, in a world where danger lurked in the guise of salvation and the line between life and death was perilously thin. In early 1985, she was 15 and found herself grappling with a predicament that far outweighed the typical concerns of adolescence. It was a relentless challenge just to find a safe place to sleep. Her departure from home was not a journey embarked upon lightly, but a desperate escape from life in New York City that had become untenable. She fled the city accompanied by her 21-year-old boyfriend. Their meager possessions included $60, a Smith & Wesson 5-shot revolver, which they inadvertently discharged during a heated debate about whether or not the safety was on in a Maryland field, a guitar, and a knapsack filled with memories of her youth. Her decision to leave home was not rooted in a desire for adventure, but rather a profound sense of necessity. At home, the escalating conflict and emotional turmoil between herself and her mother had become unbearable, with no apparent resolution in sight. Discussions about relocating to her father's in Virginia offered little solace. Her academic struggles and personal battles with self-harm were outward manifestations of a deep-seated feeling of alienation. In her mind, her physical departure merely formalized an emotional detachment that had long since taken hold. In a symbolic act of severance, she obliterated every photographic trace of herself beyond the age of 12, erasing any potential leads that might be used in a police search. This destruction was an expression of her feelings of invisibility and a profound disconnection from her past, as she ventured into an uncertain future with little more than hope for something resembling safety and peace. Her journey into the unknown began in the depths of a Maryland winter. The girl and her boyfriend stayed in an abandoned barn that stood as a silent sentinel beside the freeway. The barn, with its loft pierced by the chill winds through broken slats, nestled amidst the landscape of brown, grassy fields and frozen mud, bore an uncanny resemblance to the grim, final resting place of Regina Walters. That night, amidst the biting cold that made sleep an elusive dream, she poured her thoughts into a small journal, a solitary act of defiance against the darkness that enveloped her. By the first light of dawn, they were on the move again, their figures shrouded in hoodies, navigating the icy gauntlet of the highway. Their fortunes took a temporary turn for the better when a trucker emerging with the daybreak offered them passage. The experience of riding high in the cab of a semi, warmed by the heater and overlooking the endless stream of traffic, was a novel and welcome change from the frigid ordeal of hiking along the highway. The trucker, a seemingly genial host, extended his hospitality further with a meal of chicken fried steak and engaged in light conversation. He even allowed them the luxury of napping in the cab as he drove. However, this brief rest was shattered when she awoke to find the trucker's hand inappropriately placed under her shirt. In a moment of shock and violation, she chose stillness and silence, feigning sleep to avoid what could be a dangerous confrontation. Later, seizing a moment of perceived normalcy, they stepped out at a small truck stop, only to return to a stark realization. The truck, along with their belongings, was gone. The guitar that carried the melodies of home, the knapsack filled with cherished keepsakes, all vanished, leaving them with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the Smith & Wesson, which would later be sold in New Orleans as a final separation from their past. This first ride set the stage for her future encounters with truckers, a mix of evading unwelcome advances and the risk of abandonment. The experience taught her a vital survival rule: always be ready to exit when a truck slows down. Initially, having a boyfriend made sleep manageable, as one of them could keep watch while the other rested. But 6 weeks in, they got in a fight and broke up in Arizona, leaving her to navigate the dangers of the road alone. Without a fake ID, shelters were off limits, and the vulnerability of sleeping alone on the streets or the demeaning trade-off of sex for a place to sleep were unappealing options. Thus, she returned to hitchhiking, mastering a state of semi-alertness that allowed her to rest without fully succumbing to sleep, maintaining a precarious awareness of her surroundings. Trucks became her chosen sanctuary over cars for the semblance of safety that they offered. At truck stops, her entry into a truck was visible, noted, and discussed over CB radios, providing a layer of visibility of public existence that was crucial for her survival. Yet, this visibility came with its own risks, a high-stakes game of brinksmanship, where the consequences of a trucker's intentions became magnified. In this environment, she navigated a delicate balance, living in the narrow margin of safety that existed before a situation could escalate, a testament to her resilience and adaptability in the face of constant uncertainty. In the 1980s, truck stops were mysterious domains detached from the gaze of the external world, shrouded in dim lighting and the haze of cigarette smoke, a stark contrast to today's family-oriented travel plazas. The shelves were laden with adult magazines, from glossy publications like Hustler and Barely Legal to cheaper newsprint editions, all flaunting lurid covers. The counters near the registers were cluttered with dubious items like isobutyl nitrate and so-called aphrodisiacs such as locker room and Spanish fly, alongside bumper stickers proclaiming, "Ass, gas, or grass. No one rides for free." Within this harrowing pastiche of the crass, the visceral, and the downright dangerous, her concerns were pragmatic rather than ideological. The immediate need was to secure rides. The hostile atmosphere often barred her from entering the restaurant area, as the prevailing assumption cast on any unaccompanied woman was that she was a prostitute by default. This suspicion relegated her to soliciting rides near the shower area, a strategy that was obviously fraught with its own dangers. Gradually, she adapted, learning to leverage the truckers' use of CB radios to arrange transportation indirectly. The Zoo Channel, notorious for its unfiltered and often offensive banter, was no place for a woman's voice, which would invariably provoke a barrage of vulgar commentary. On the CB, women were crudely referred to as beaver, a dehumanizing label even the well-intentioned used while trying to assist her. They concocted stories to garner sympathy and secure her a ride. A fabricated tale of a woman needing to reach Flagstaff for a relative's funeral, invariably cast as an innocent victim of a callous boyfriend who had absconded with all of her possessions. This method of securing rides, while effective, underscored the lengths to which she had to go to navigate the perils and prejudices of the road. Through her journey, she leapt from truck to truck, literally, seldom touching the ground, yet even in constant motion, safety remained elusive. Adhering to her guiding principle that the only safe truck was one in motion meant she was perpetually alert. Every change in speed, every turn, downshift, or drift toward the shoulder snapped her awake. The toll of constant vigilance and sleep deprivation led her to categorize her encounters based on a scale of sexually aggressive behavior, ranging from 1 to 5, from benign to overtly threatening. 1. The driver kept any sexual thoughts to himself. 2. The driver propositioned her, offering to pay for sex. 3. The driver asserted she owed him sex for the ride and the meal, threatening to leave her in a dangerous location if she refused. 4. The driver made good on that threat, abandoning her in a perilous place. 5. She found herself contemplating escape at the slightest indication of a threat, ready to jump from the truck to avoid assault. Most truckers fell within the middle of this scale, but the one who had resembled Robert Ben Rhodes, the notorious truck stop killer, was off the charts. The presence of the hunting knife and his demeanor neither nervous, angry, nor excited, but calm and methodical, placed him in a category of his own, more akin to a hunter preparing for a kill than a long-haul trucker. Her research into Rhodes 27 years later highlighted his preference for hitchhikers over prostitutes, especially targeting runaways. The first step in his pattern involved luring them into his sleeper cab, modified with anchor points for restraints. Though she hadn't seen any shackles, his knife was evidence enough of his intentions. "It has to be him," a friend had said. "I mean, how many of these guys could there be?" According to the FBI, the terrifying answer is, a lot of them. The grim reality of the dangers lurking along the nation's highways was starkly highlighted in 2009 when the FBI launched the Highway Serial Killings Initiative. This program was a response to an alarming trend: a growing number of bodies, predominantly women, discovered along the edges of the interstates, many discarded in dumpsters. Focusing on victims last seen near truck stops and rest areas, the FBI identified over 500 such cases. Among the suspects, nearly all were long-haul truckers, painting a harrowing picture of the risks associated with transient lifestyles intersecting with these mobile predators. The existence of individuals like Rhodes who preyed on vulnerable women and evaded capture was a reality the girl was all too painfully aware of, even without official confirmation. The truck stop rumor mill was rife with horrifying tales of violence against women, from brutal slayings to gruesome acts of retaliation by truckers against those they accused of transgressions. The CB radio, a lifeline and a source of community for many on the road, also carried the desperate calls of prostitutes, known derogatorily as lot lizards, looking for clients among the truckers, an echo of their perilous existence. In this world, the distinction between a hitchhiker and a prostitute was often blurred by the trucker's perceptions, casting her, by association, as a lot lizard as well. This label signified more than a mere occupation. It marked her as expendable, a person whose disappearance might not be noticed or investigated for months, if at all. The challenge of connecting a missing persons report in one state to human remains found in another was daunting, a fact underscored by the overwhelming response to a teletype message sent by Illinois state troopers seeking information on missing young females. The request, aimed at identifying Regina Walters, yielded over 900 matches, a stark testament to the scale of the crisis and the anonymity that shielded roadway predators. The woman in 2012, who had been the 15-year-old girl in 1985, knew that if any connection to Rhodes existed, it would hinge on the discovery of the teenager in the dumpster. Details from that case could pinpoint a date and location to cross-reference with Rhodes' trucking logs, offering a straightforward answer to the haunting question: was Rhodes the trucker she encountered? Her initial step, searching for Dead Girl Truck Stop Martinsburg, yielded no leads, unsurprising given the event's timing in the pre-digital era. Exploring Martinsburg, Pennsylvania, she found it unexpectedly small, a mere dot unlikely to host a significant truck stop. This prompted her to consider other Martinsburgs across states like Indiana, Iowa, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Missouri, West Virginia, and New York. A crucial piece of her history involved a visit to her father in Virginia a week before the discovery of the body in the dumpster. Her dad was a man of modest means, making her hesitant to impose further. Upon departing, she sought a ride toward an imagined brighter future in California, a detail her father confirmed years later without hesitation, pinpointing Martinsburg, West Virginia as her departure point. Curiously, she asked her father, "Were there any murders that summer?" To which he recalled the message she left him, warning of a 17-year-old female hitchhiker found dead and ensuring him that it wasn't her, that she was safe. This confirmation was a relief, solidifying the existence of both the Martinsburg truck stop in her story and the unfortunate hitchhiker. The challenge now was to delve deeper, fortified by the knowledge that her memories, despite their haziness from sleep deprivation, were rooted in an awful reality. The investigation into Robert Ben Rhodes' heinous crimes formed a daunting maze that stretched across local and federal jurisdictions, encompassing 5 states before converging on Houston, Texas. This focal point emerged not by chance, but due to a myriad of connections binding key elements of the case to the state. Rhodes himself hailed from Texas, as did his wife, Deborah Davis, and the unfortunate victims Regina Walters and Ricky Jones, alongside others he had ensnared within Texas's borders. Seeking deeper insights into the case, she traveled to Austin, Texas to consult with two former FBI operatives, Mark Young and Robert F. Lee, both of whom had dedicated a significant portion of their careers to unraveling the Rhodes mystery. Young, with his dual expertise as a profile and a field agent, offered her a nuanced understanding of criminal patterns over a meal located at a local sushi restaurant. He delineated the distinction between a criminal's modus operandi, or MO, mutable habits shaped by circumstance and whim, and their signature, the immutable mark of their inner compulsions. Rhodes' methods varied, employing firearms, ligatures, and likely knives in his assaults. Yet it was his signature that laid bare the unchanging core of his sadism, the ritualistic shavings of his victims' heads and pubic areas, along with piercings, bruisings, and other indicators of sustained torture, tracing back to deep-seated perverse fantasies that remained consistent over time. Mark Young, standing at an imposing 6'4", embodied the legacy of a Texas lawman through the generations. He unveiled the ordeals of Shanna Holtz, a grim prelude to the capture of Regina Walters. Rhodes, detained for assaulting Holtz, had ensnared her at a truck stop, subjecting her to a harrowing captivity and escape from his truck's confines at a Houston brewery. Although Rhodes was known for chaining his victims, Young clarified that Holtz had not been shackled when she escaped. Rhodes had told her to sit there and be a good girl. Shayna Holtz's resilience, forged from years of survival on the streets, defied Rhodes' expectations, leading her to flee and momentarily land him in the hands of justice, although she ultimately refrained from pressing charges. Young goes on to share photographs of truck stop killer Robert Ben Rhodes with our protagonist, the woman who had been that 15-year-old runaway in 1985, and was now on a mission to determine if the man she had escaped was in fact the notorious truck stop killer. The pictures stir memories and the peculiarities of recognition, underscoring the fallibility of memory itself. Amidst all this, Young anticipates her recounting a narrative that she has reluctantly become more acquainted with. She finds herself sharing her story once again, despite its emotional toll. Part of her survival strategy was to look through a trucker's cassette collections, a tactic which provided both a distraction and a means to gauge the driver's demeanor, a method that revealed a critical shift in one particular driver's attitude. This part of her story leads to a discussion with Mark Young on the significance of weapons, with Young noting, "A gun was about control, but a knife is personal," highlighting the intimate brutality that Rhodes preferred. The conversation then turns analytical as she probes the nature of her encounter, comparing it to Rhodes' psychological profile. Young's observation that the trucker's willingness to share his morbid fascinations without physical restraint suggests a predilection for terror as manipulation, a trait resonant with Rhodes' own modus operandi. "But a real serial killer wouldn't have let me go, right?" she asks Young. His reply is speculative. "I don't know. Maybe he didn't think you'd run." Even at the time, she'd wondered if her decision to run away was merely a component of his twisted game. Rhodes harbored a profound fascination with games, drawing considerable influence from the book Games People Play, which posited that each social interaction was a strategic game. This book, particularly the games Courtroom, Beat Me Daddy, and Frigid Woman, describes scenarios that Rhodes found captivating, even reflective of his own manipulative endeavors. He frequently referenced this book, treating it as a guide for his interactions. His correspondence with his wife underscored his mindset, especially his advice that one could play, pass, or run, a mantra that echoed ominously in her ears, resonating with her own harrowing experience. The more she uncovered about Rhodes, the clearer the disturbing parallels between their lives became. While she navigated the perils of hitchhiking, he roamed the highways with sinister intent. As she honed her survival skills, Rhodes refined his predatory techniques, sharpened his teeth and claws. Among the documents that Young had spread out for her to review was a photograph of Regina Walters captured moments before her life took a tragic turn. The image showed Regina radiating youth and joy, a stark contrast to her tragic fate. The photograph provided by Regina's mother had been pivotal in confirming her identity, with Young noting the distinctive small gap in her teeth and matching freckles. Young then presented another photograph, this one of a young girl, possibly Native American, an unidentified victim who sat in Rhodes' truck, appearing disoriented or tired. Her untouched, glossy black hair suggested the photo was taken when she had been one of Rhodes' recent captives. If he'd had her for long, her head would have been shaved. These haunting images served as grim reminders of the unknown numbers of Rhodes' victims, their stories untold and faces unrecognized. On the phone, retired FBI agent Robert F. Lee was civil and to the point, but not overtly warm. She arrived at his door in the sweltering heat, was greeted, and then ushered into a spacious living room. Lee, imposing and capable, could easily be mistaken for someone still active in the field. A whimsical pink plastic castle stood in his living room. "Granddaughter," he explained. On the couch lay a large pillow adorned with the FBI seal. "That's from my old SWAT jacket," Lee shared with a grin, noting the emblem's retirement due to its resemblance to a target. She sensed that Lee liked it when people were concise and aimed to cut straight to her pressing questions. But before she could, Lee interrupted her with a profound statement. "I just want you to know," he said earnestly, making eye contact, "that what Rhodes did to those women, he did to those women. You didn't do it." This unexpected reassurance from Lee shifted the atmosphere, addressing an unspoken guilt she'd harbored about not contacting the police sooner. His acknowledgement of her feelings without prior confession was startling and provided a moment of raw honesty. She confessed to Lee a truth she had kept from others, that her silence had been born from the fear that no one would believe her. "I just didn't think anyone would believe me," she said. "Well," Lee reflected, acknowledging the validity of her concerns, "you're probably right. Look at Lisa Pennell." All right, this story is not complete, but we're going to end part 1 here. If you'd like to hear part 2, if you're brave enough to complete this terrible tale of the truck stop killer, please do come back next Thursday for the conclusion of the truck stop killer. Now wait, don't go yet. I know the story's not over, but we did just start a new segment of the show last week, and I'd like to stick to it. So now, for this first half of the story, we're going to move on to key takeaways, 3 of them, not 5. I decided 5 was too many, and the moral of the story. Now, I don't mean to suggest that these are the only key takeaways or even the best key takeaways, and same goes for the moral. You should, of course, draw your own conclusions, and we will, of course, revisit all the takeaways and the moral next week at the conclusion of the story. So with that, here we go. It is time for 3 key takeaways. Number 1, the impact of trauma. This narrative deeply explores the long-lasting effects of traumatic experiences, not just on the direct victims, but also on those who encounter the aftermath. It shows how the trauma we face shapes our perceptions, decisions, and interactions with others and the world. Number 2, the weight of secrets. The girl and woman who's the protagonist of our story, Vanessa Veselka, her struggle with whether or not to share her story highlights the burden of carrying secrets and the complex calculations of safety, trust, and the fear of not being believed that survivors have to navigate. Number 3, misunderstood courage. The story underscores the nuanced reality of what it means to be brave, from Vanessa's decision to run as a teenager to her interactions with law enforcement years later. The different and sometimes surprising faces of her bravery challenge our conventional notions of courage and reveal the fierce internal battles that accompany survival. All right, those are our 3 key takeaways for the story so far: the impact of trauma, the weight of secrets, and misunderstood bravery. Now, it's time for the moral of the story. The moral of the story so far. The moral of the story so far. Courage lies not in the absence of fear, but in the choice to face it, and to speak one's truth, despite the consequences. Alright, that's the show for today. I'll see you all next Thursday for part 2 of the Truck Stop Killer. Thank you for joining me on this harrowing journey. Until next time, I'm Zevin Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery.
If you like the show, please subscribe, review, and tell your friends. You can find us on social media at Kinda Murdery or email at kindamurdery@gmail.com.